on to the topic of the day. Two parts to this, to my presentation today. Part one is on Judaism. And in part one, I will be stressing my view that Judaism is the most powerful and insightful moral wisdom tradition in the entire Western world. I think there is nothing comparable to what it has done, and I'll try to explain that. And I point out that it's 3,000 years old, and it has had an impact which most people are unaware of. It is a stunning religious experience, moral experience. That's the first part. The second part of my talk is on Zionism, which is a 19th century hallucination. Zionism is the fantastic, literally incredible belief that, putting it in terms of Jewish orthodoxy, the God who controls everything on this earth from here all the way to the quasars and the rest of the universe, that same God is into real estate distribution, and that he has assigned Palestine for Jews, or those who claim to be Jews, and there's a big question often there, and he has also assigned the expulsion, the ethnic cleansing of everyone on that property who is not a Jew. That's Zionism. Very simply put, that is Zionism. Anybody who identifies the beauty of Judaism with the ugliness and brutality of Zionism is insulting Judaism and is extremely anti-Semitic. One of the most anti-Semitic things you could do, anti-Jewish things you could do, is to identify Judaism, the 3,000-year-old phenomenon, with this upstart from the 19th century that makes no moral sense whatsoever. First of all, then, to Judaism. Judaism is a stunning religion, as I've said. Probably the two most important centuries in Western history, in my judgment, are going back 3,000 years from 1250 to 1050 BCE. So 1250 to 1050 BCE, before the Common Era is the way it's put, rather than AD and BC. Those 2 years, what happened in those years? Well, many people think that they know because they've heard literal interpretations of the Exodus. And what they think is that we've all seen it. Cecil B. DeMille has even put it on film. But there were the poor Hebrew slaves, and they had an exodus, and first of all, God sent a bunch of nasty plagues and frogs and killing of the firstborn and all this, and finally Pharaoh, you know the story. Pharaoh resents and opens up the sea, and they go through, and Pharaoh changed his mind. He starts sending the army after him, and God is a trickster in this story, and down comes the waters, and the poor army's gone. It's a fascinating story, except that none of it ever happened. What happened? What did happen? Where did it come from, this story? What we failed to realize is that the story is poetry. It's in the category of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. It's in the category of Virgil's Aeneid. It's epic poetry about the origins of this people, which eventually came to be called Jews and Judaism. It's an epic poetry. It's not history. Well, that's a bit of a surprise. I quote you just a couple of people. There's Norman Gottwald, who is the premier historian. He wrote a massive book called The Tribes of Yahweh. And he says, with regard, there is a complete lack of information about the Exodus. I quote two Jewish scholars, Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silberman, who've researched the whole history and area, and they say quite simply, there was no mass exodus from Egypt. Robert Wright, another scholar, said some biblical historians now doubt that Moses even existed, and virtually none now believe that the biblical account of Moses are reliable. Moses may be a composite, a literary composite put together years later from a number of other people that were part of that period. Now that's the voice of historians. So you'd say, well, that's something of a loss. Not at all. It's only a loss if you want what is obviously fantastic stories. Could you imagine a God killing the firstborn of people to make a point and sending a bunch of silly frogs? No, this is obviously the stuff of myth. But what really happened? Why is it so important? Why did I stress it? It's poetry, and it's most influential poetry, because the Exodus was a moral exodus from the Egyptian model of life to the Sinai model of life. So looking at what was really being said, here's what's being said. The Egyptian model of life, which was used by all the surrounding kingdoms at that time, was what we would call in modern terms 1% rule. Pyramid. All the power at the tippy top. And so the Exodus, which was a moral exodus from 1% oligarchical rule, plutocracy rule, crossing into another world of Sinai. All of history, these poets were saying, is a battle between Egypt, the Egypt model, and Sinai, the Sinai model. And what was the Sinai model? Well, it was presented again figuratively, kind of a legend style. What happened? Moses went up the mountain, and to make the point that it was serious stuff coming here, guys, the mountains trembled and roared and thunder and lightning. And in other words, the message was, listen up, folks. God's talking something. He comes down with a whole new way of life on these tablets. And what's it like? It's beautiful. It's predicated, Deuteronomy 15:4, on the idea that in this new way of life, it's going to be based on sharing, not domination. And Deuteronomy 15:4 has the summary, there shall be no poor among you. None. Absolutely no poor. The absolute elimination of poverty. The beautiful texts that come out of that. Isaiah 32:17 deserves 2 Nobel Prizes, one in peace and one in economics. And think of the brilliance of this. It says, until you plant tzedakah, the form of justice that eliminates poverty, you will never have shalom. Shalom is peace. There's no other way to get it. You cannot build a society with 1% domination at the top and poverty as the base. Cannot do it. There shall be no poor among you. That was the ideal. That was the pioneer. Thomas Aquinas has a little statement which actually sums that up. Thomas said, justice consists in sharing. Justice consists in sharing. The society that is not sharing is not just. If every little boy and every little girl does not have perfect health care, it's not a just society. If you allow wealth to accumulate all the way to the top, and so that the top 1% is getting 25% of all income, which we did in the 1920s, and it fell on its face in 1929. Then we corrected that a little bit. This is the wisdom of these Hebrews. And the people that thought it up, they called them apiru. That's what they called them. That's the root of the word Hebrew. The apiru means outlaw. They were like outlaws. And the outlaw system was amazing. Just looking at a few of the scholars, they said Israel broke totally free from feudalism, 1% rule, and extended its outlaw system over an entire area that lasted 200 years, and an entire people, so that outlawry became inlawry and the basis of a new social order. Israel was pioneering, said Gottwald, a new form of social relations which destroys class privilege. Hey, forget the damn frogs and all those other mythical parts of it. This is powerful stuff going on. And it had happened. And they pulled it off for those 2 glorious centuries. Eventually they fell back into, oh, now we got to have kings. Everybody wants kings. So what they're basically saying to us is that this was, again, Gottwald said, it was all based on the idea 3,000 years ago that you can't have a just society unless you have an enlightened and publicly active citizenry. So the whole story of Exodus was a story of a revolt by the 99% against the 1%. Could anything, as Walter Brueggemann say, could anything be more contemporaneous? We live in Egypt. We're still living in Egypt. The 1% are still very much in charge. We experimented with Sinai, when? From 1945 to 1973. Under Eisenhower, a Republican, the top tax rate was 90%. And we had a wonderful time. The middle class developed. There was a base. People could afford to buy your things because there was no poverty. And that began to crash, and under Reagan, it totally crashed. And back we went to Egypt. So that was what Judaism produced this. And just to quote you, a couple of quotes emphasizing the same point. One of them is from a philosopher, Michael Walzer, and he said that Exodus to Sinai epic had an almost unmatchable success in human history. It's the root of our democratic theory. That's where our democratic... Find your Jewish friends right here and say, thank you for democracy. And while you're at it, say to your Jewish friends here, thanks for the weekend. They made up the Sabbath. They said, don't have a rat race all day working every day. You need a little time off to celebrate and enjoy life. They introduced that humanizing thing. So we're all the beneficiaries of those aspects of Judaism. But the way that philosopher Michael Walzer puts it, the Pharaoh's oppression, the whole idea of Sinai, getting out to Canaan, is still with us as a powerful memory shaping our perception of the political world. And what does it say? It says the door of hope is still open. Things are not what they might be. That's the message of Sinai. There's possibility out there. Walter Brueggemann, wonderful Hebrew scholar of the Hebrew scriptures, and he says that the same thing, what the Jews did back there, before they were even called Jews, the Israelites, was a paradigmatic narrative through which all social reality is described and re-experienced. It was, in fact, the first move towards a social safety net set up in the history of the world. And who were the prime citizens? Who were the people who most enjoyed prestige in that kingdom of what came to be Judaism? You keep hearing them, that little trinity of people, widows who were terribly destitute in that society, orphans and immigrants. Do you begin to see the relevance, the incredible relevance? Now that is Judaism. Now I turn to the unhappy discussion of Zionism. And when I teach this to my students at Marquette, one of the first things I get into it right on the board, Judaism is beautiful. Zionism is shameful. Totally different. And when you criticize Zionism, you are not anti-Semitic, you are being Jewish, because Zionism is a heresy to the glories of Judaism. That's a point missing throughout most of our culture. Nobody in Congress seems to know it. The vast majority of American Jews and non-Jews don't seem to know it. But Zionism is not Judaism, and it is a horrible mistake. It's the cause of a great increase of anti-Jewish sentiment in the world, because people are saying, that's what we're like. If we took over, we would take 80% of your waters like we do in the West Bank, and that's what Jews are. That's awful, because that's not what Jews are like at their very heart. So let me look at this question of Zionism, which cannot be discussed in our strange society. You can get much more free discussion of it in Israel, in Haaretz, and some of these other liberal groups. You'll get more discussion of it with Jewish Voice for Peace, a wonderful group, of which I am a member. They let the Irishmen in. I said, what the hell? So let's talk about various aspects of Zionism. There's been a great debate about whether or not Zionism is racist. And in fact, there was a resolution passed at one time saying, yeah, it is. And there was a big debate in the UN back and forth on that issue. Well, I would say, let's be fair. Let's let the Zionists speak for themselves. And if they say they're racist, then we'll have to take them at their word. Looking at the beginnings of the invasion of Palestine, Joseph Weitz was a minister responsible for the colonization, a very highly placed early Zionist, put it bluntly. Between ourselves, it must be clear that there is no room for both peoples together in this country. The only solution is a Palestine without Arabs. And there's no other way than to transfer Arabs from here to the neighboring countries, to transfer all of them. Not one village, not one tribe should be left. That sounds like ethnic cleansing, recognized in the United Nations as a crime against humanity. And I'm just simply quoting the Zionist. David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first head of state, said the Zionist goal has always been, quote, to secure that the whole of Palestine will be Jewish and not only a part of it. That's pretty clear. Yigal Allon, a commander of the early fighting force, said the purpose of the Zionists, and he even used the word, is the cleansing of Palestine of all Arabs. Cleansing from Palestine all the Arabs. In 1919, a fact-finding mission appointed by President Woodrow Wilson reached the conclusion that Zionism looked forward to a complete dispossession of the present non-Jewish inhabitants of Palestine. And another expression showing just what was going on here, in 1891, when this was all starting, Ahad Ha'am wrote of the Palestinians, quote, that the Arabs are all wild beasts of the desert, a people akin to jackasses who do not understand what is going on around them. Of course, then the obvious conclusion would be those jackasses have no right to be here. Another Zionist, early Zionist, said, to fold their tents and silently steal away is the powerful habit of the Arabs. Let them exemplify it now. Always has been. Expulsion. Out you go. Is it any surprise that the only Jews that Hitler in his Mein Kampf had any praise for were the Zionists? Ethnic cleansers have a sense of compatibility with one another. There is nothing beautiful or defensible about Zionism, and speaking as a theologian, I can say theologically it is loony. It is completely out of whack, okay? And I say that the very characterization of what the people were like, if people are that, if they're basically subhuman, they're like beasts of the desert, then obviously you could mow the lawn periodically in Gaza and wipe them and their children out. It's horrible stuff. Please, never call that Jewish. My critique of Zionism is a Jewish critique. So the theology is based upon such poor theology, based upon texts that were totally taken out of their context. For example, Deuteronomy chapter 7 says, when Yahweh your God brings you into the land which you are about to enter and occupy, and he clears away many nations before you, this is one tough God we're talking about here. The Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, and the Hivites. And when Yahweh your God gives them over to you, you must utterly destroy them. Got it? Yeah, that's clear enough. Show them no mercy. No mercy. For you are a people holy to Yahweh your God. Yahweh your God has chosen you out of all the peoples of the earth to be his people, his treasured possession. That's a horrible misinterpretation. Much of the Bible is not prescriptive of what you ought to do. Much of the Bible, and this is a very important distinction, is descriptive of the way folks were thinking at a time that was wild, when you could do all kinds of things like sell your daughter into slavery, when you could, Deuteronomy 13, when you destroy a people, destroy everything, all their men, women, children, animals, pour salt in their fields, though you may keep some of the young girls as sex slaves. That's primitive, that's descriptive of the way life was lived. You find it in the Christian Bible also. That beautiful text in the Christian Bible, was that descriptive or prescriptive? I never tire of quoting it to my wife. Wives, obey your husband as if they were. Edie does not. Well, that's a perfect example. That's the way the Bible is. It has junk galore in it, awful stuff, because that's what was there. The glory of it is there's breakthroughs. And I just described one of the breakthroughs, that whole beautiful poetic image of moving out of Egypt. And you know, they're so accurate with that one that we're now living in Egypt. We're back in Egypt. And all of history is that way. There's a book by this Hurwitz who said, when you look all the way back to the Babylonian times, it's a human penchant. We're so stupid as a species. But you leave us alone, what we'll do is we'll tilt and allow all wealth and power to go to the top. And we'll leave starvation all the way. We keep doing it. All these countries, you go back to ancient Russia, ancient Rome, ancient Babylonia, keeps happening. And what was Sinai? Sinai was a call, stop it, stupid. You can share. You can eliminate poverty. And you can even beat your sword into a plowshare. Because when there's enough sharing, there's less reason to go around killing folks. So the theology is, as I say, loony, not deserving of any respect. The history that is also part of Zionism is also, and I'll be constantly using good, solid Jewish and Hebrew Israeli scholars talking to you right now. But the history, looking at my page 4 here, the idea that all those people were moved out, that there was this forced exodus of the Jews 2,000 years ago, and that they were moved out forcibly by Rome and put in mainly Europe and Eastern Europe, and they remained a people, some even say a race of people, and that now they have a right to return from where they were expelled en masse. Well, Shlomo Sand, an Israeli Jewish professor of history at Tel Aviv University, said, this is pure mythology. The Romans did not export whole masses of people. They couldn't have even tried it, and it wouldn't have occurred to them. They simply crushed them on sight. Anybody that was a problem, they didn't bother trying to say, oh, we'll try to find a place for them in Europe. Totally fictional. He says no. And it raises that very large question, which is important. One book I have on my shelf about the myth of the Jewish race, and the author says, I am not a Jew. They both had the same mother and father. My brother is a Jew. Oh, well, that's interesting. Because he's identifying being a Jew as someone who buys into the Jewish religion and its moral tradition, and also its rituals. His brother's an observant Jew. He's not. But it's not genetic. There's no genetic test for Judaism any more than there's a genetic test for Lutheranism. It's not that. And it's very questionable. I quote another Jewish author, Arthur Kessler. He says, the large majority of surviving Jews in the world is of Eastern European, mainly Khazar origin. If so, this would mean that their ancestors came not from the Jordan, but from the Volga, not from Canaan, but from the Caucasus, and that genetically they are more closely related to Huns Ungars, Magyar tribes, than they are to the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's something of a revelation to many people. Now, do you see how you can, there's terrific pressure. When I've tried to talk about some of this in various audiences, I've been compared to Father Coughlin, who was an absolute bigot. Really, he was a pro-Nazi type bigot, horrible, and horrible on the Jews. But criticizing Zionism is, again, not criticizing Judaism. It's criticizing an aberration that came out of Judaism. And unfortunately, too many people don't know that. So the science is wrong that this is the case. How could all of these be a single stock, including blue-eyed Jews from Russia and dark-skinned Sudanese Jews? This is not a single genetic stock. There's been a whole transition that has occurred throughout history. There's another thing about Zionism, already implied with what I've said here. And again, I quote Mark Ellis, former director of the Center for Jewish Studies at Baylor. And he refers to Gaza, which we all now well know, as the biggest prison in the world. You know what it is? It's the Warsaw Ghetto, replicated. What an irony that the victims could replicate those exact conditions. The conditions there are horrendous. Let water tell the tale. On the West Bank, according to the United Nations, BBC News, Amnesty International, 80% of all the water is reserved for Jews. That's not Jewish. That's not what Jews should do. That's a terrible way to behave, where you have water for your swimming pools, and they don't have enough water for their chickens. In Gaza, the great Warsaw Ghetto replicated, 90 to 95% of the water comes from its only water resource, the coastal aquifer, and that is contaminated and unfit for human consumption, according to Amnesty International. That's awful. That's violent. And it's genocidal. It's causing death. It's causing trauma. And if you speak about it, you're in trouble. There's a Jewish group at Marquette. I let them know that I'd published this article, said it's a lot of research in this article. Be worth reading. They turned me into the dean. I was summoned before the dean and 2 other officers for creating an atmosphere hostile to Jewish students. And I knew that would be the charge. Because there's a group called Campus Watch. Any criticism of Israel is creating a hostile situation for Jewish students, and you must be punished for it. So I was punished, being summoned before the dean. And of course I told him that I'd written down on my yellow pad, creating a hostile environment for Jewish students. And when he said it, I said, I knew it. I knew it was coming. That's a policy that is in existence out here. If anyone talks divestment or anything like that, that's terrible stuff. That's a disgrace. The next thing I have listed here after genocide, which is awfully serious, is what I've been calling lately the Stockholm Syndrome. And the Stockholm Syndrome, you know what it is, generally, the Stockholm Syndrome, is that people who have been captured they don't fall in love necessarily like Patty Hearst did, but they get mesmerized by the captors and eventually identify with them and accept the abuse. That's the Stockholm Syndrome. It's an interesting psychological thing. Well, I believe the United States is experiencing a Stockholm Syndrome with regard to Zionist propaganda. And we've identified with it. And as a result of it, we can take horrendous abuse, and not do anything about it. Accept it, come back for more, and send $10 million again the next day to the people who did it. Just a couple of quick incidents that we should not forget, lest we forget. On June 8th, 1967, during the Israeli Six-Day War, The USS Liberty was floating. It was a spy ship, an American spy ship in international waters. What was it doing? It was spying, wanted to know what the Russians were doing, what the Arabs were doing, what the Israelis were doing. Israel did not want us to know that they were expanding their territory. They were going to take over the Golan Heights, which they still hold. They didn't want us to know that. Well, we were very pro-Israel at that time. And the people on board the ship, I've spoken to a couple of them who were on that ship. Well, they said during the day, it was a beautiful day, Israeli planes started to fly over very low. And sailors who were sunbathing on the deck were waving to, these are our buddies. This is Israel. This is our big ally. And we admire them for what they've been doing. So it was very friendly. However, all of a sudden, 9 hours, they have been surveying it for 9 hours. They identified the ship as American, could hardly miss it, had a huge flag, had its identification. They even identified it as the USS Liberty. And they knew it was a spy ship and that it was unarmed. Suddenly, in a total surprise, in the early afternoon, in a carefully coordinated naval and air force attack, Israeli planes and torpedo boats pummeled the ship with 821 shells, including planes and including napalm, and almost sank the ship. It almost went down. They were bringing in helicopters and shooting up the life rafts that the sailors were beginning to put into the water, indicating this was to be Operation Obliteration. But a little sailor named Terry Halberdier, the first thing they did in the attack was shoot down all the equipment, all the electronic equipment on deck, so that they were isolated. They couldn't summon. But little Halberdier was able to rig up some kind of an aerial and signaled, sent a little signal out to the Fifth Fleet of what was going on. At that very instant, the attack stopped. And the Israeli captain of the torpedo ship flashed the signal, "Do you need help?" The ship was almost completely destroyed. It killed, just in that particular time, it killed 20 some of our sailors, wounded another 271 of them. Nothing like this had happened since Pearl Harbor, an attack on an American ship. And the CIA officer, Ray McGovern, records this as part of the public record now. Before the attack started, an Israeli pilot, a decent human being, said to ground control, "You want me to bomb this? This is an American ship. You still want us to attack?" Ground control, "Yes, follow orders." Pilot, "But sir, it's an American ship. I can see the flag." Ground control, "Never mind, hit it." What was the American reaction to this? All of the sailors on board and Marines were told that if they ever mentioned this, they could be court-martialed, even to their wives. We had to protect Israel. Stockholm Syndrome, protecting the people that have just done this to you. There was even a discussion of saying, maybe we should sink it before it gets home, some Americans, so there'd be nothing to embarrass Israel in this case. That's an ugly story, a very ugly story, but it's true. It's amply, I've talked to people that were on deck. One of them is so traumatized, his wife won't let him read about this incident because he doesn't sleep for a week if that happens. Some of our people knew that it was not an accident. They knew it was deliberate, but they just continued with it. That's just one incident. There was another incident of Rachel Corrie. Rachel Corrie was a young girl. Also, she was over trying to protect, this was in March 2003, 23-year-old there. She was in Gaza. She was trying to protect Palestinian homes, which were being destroyed by the Israelis. She was particularly trying to stop them from destroying water wells. A military target? Water wells? She was trying to stop it. She was staying for a while with the Nasrallah family, occupied by 2 brothers, their wives, and 5 children. All of a sudden, the American-made Caterpillar bulldozer, with 2 occupants in the cab, with an armored personnel carrier right beside him, started toward the Nasrallah house to demolish it. And Rachel got up on, she had a megaphone, she was shouting through, she had an orange jacket on, and she got up on this mound of dirt and started shouting. She was looking right into the cabin of the 2 drivers, and they didn't stop. They ran over her twice and killed her. And what was the reaction when our State Department got into it? An unfortunate accident. She died in the arms of Elizabeth, a Jewish consort of hers who worked with her on this peace movement from England. There's the irony of it. She died in the arms of a beautiful Jewish friend, Rachel Corrie, and no protest. The Mavi Marmara, the ship, was attacked, killed another American citizen, and 7 or 8 Turks went wild. We don't. We have the Stockholm Syndrome. We didn't say a word. Who else can kill American citizens with impunity? That's not Jewish. That's awful. The final notes refer to moving toward final notes. And this one is called the coup d'etat. The coup d'etat is the takeover of the American Congress. The American Congress is Israeli-occupied territory. There's nothing that Israel wants that it cannot get in the American Congress. Every single person, as soon as you are elected, remember, AIPAC is assigned to you. You have a full-time AIPAC 1. You are advised of the financial advantages of voting the Israeli line, and it's very clear, if you don't, we'll find your opponent who will. And in several cases, one of them is very, very close to me. My daughter-in-law is, one of her in-laws is Earl Hilliard. And Earl Hilliard was an African-American member of Congress, House of Representatives. He often did vote with AIPAC, but not always. So he was an independent. He thought, oh, that's a decent point, I'll go with it. The other was, I won't. They went down, poured millions into the campaign of his opponent, and Hilliard is out of the Congress. That had nothing to do with what he was doing for his people. Nothing whatsoever. Now, Hilliard is not alone. Paul Findlay, also knocked out. Cynthia McKinney. Everybody in that Congress, when Netanyahu came over to insult the President of the United States, and our Congress rises, I couldn't bear to look at it, but one of my colleagues did. 24 times, as Uri Abnirni says, jumping like yo-yos, because AIPAC is in the gallery, and they're watching who's jumping and who's not. That is corruption, folks. That is a coup d'etat. And that's why you can't get anything done until we do what we're doing today. We're going to talk about it. You know, the estimate of how much money we're giving, George Ball estimated when you look out at everything, in fact, that you can get tax-exempt status for things that contribute to Israel's policies. We pay for that. It gets tax-exempt status. He said it comes closer to $11 billion a year that is given. That is a coup d'etat. That is a takeover. And yet there's, as I say, terrific pressure by misguided Jews in this country and misguided Americans, non-Jews, who are totally duped about all of this and don't realize that we do not send people to Congress to take care of the national interest of a foreign country, but to make their first business the interest of this country. And that's been taken away from us. So part of the cure is actually speaking your mind on it. And in speaking your mind, I think we could realize that there is a cure. There's a cure. Is Israel going to go away? Absolutely not. Is the United States going to go away and give it back to the Indians? Who are you kidding? The facts of life are referred to as the facts on the ground. Obviously, certain things happen that are not nice, and here we are. But you can do something about that. You can respond to it. You can begin to speak about it. But actually, ideas have been put on the table by the Arabs to the effect that they know Israel's not going to go away. The myth, one of the great lies, is that somehow Israel is the fourth strongest military in the world and the sixth strongest nuclear power in the world. The people in Gaza do not have an army, a navy, a Marine Corps, or even an airfield, much less a decent life. They are not a threat. They are not a threat, and they're being absolutely eliminated. In the 19th century, Palestine was peaceful before Zionism. About 4% Jews. That was the era of the kibbutz, which people living off the land with a good sense of tradition. About 10% Christian, and the rest Muslim. Total peace. No bloodshed, no disharmony. Everybody getting along. And then all of a sudden, the move, Zionism, moved in, drove 700,000 people out of their homes. It's hard to imagine that, emotionally, driven out of your home. One man said, my Olive Garden is now Ben Gurion Airport. Just simply driven out, brutally, and imprisoned, so that at the present time, the entire Palestine is Jewish controlled. You can see it on a map, where you see, first of all, the early part of it, this purplish, this color here represented Palestine. And then when arbitrarily the United Nations and the great powers, England and the United States, everybody gets, we'll give a bunch of it and we'll give this to the Zionist enterprise. And then it keeps growing. And finally, in the final picture, there is no independent Palestinian territory. You're either under siege in Gaza or you're occupied in the West Bank. And finally, Netanyahu, what a rare event, was forced by political necessity to tell the truth. We have no intention whatsoever of having two independent states side by side. So what's this possible solution that I mentioned? I'll read it here. We must remember that in March 2002, all 22 members of the Arab League offered to recognize Israel's right to exist and have normal relations with Israel. March 2002. This has been repeated since. This offer has since been repeatedly reconfirmed. In April 2002, the Organization of the Islamic Conference, which includes 57 nations, concurred with the Arab League offer, and the Iranian delegation expressed its full approval. Full approval. The condition was Israel's compliance, not a bad condition, with the United Nations resolutions 194, 242, and 338, and the return to the pre-1967 borders. Hamas said it would acknowledge Israel's right to exist, to live in peace with its pre-1967 borders. Israel has a clear choice, and that is to say, you can have peace. Israel's not going to be thrown into the sea. It's there. It's there to stay. But you cannot stay if you continue to live in territory that you have stolen. If you call theft settlement, someone took your house and moved in, you say, well, we just started a settlement here. That's theft. If you continue to do that, you won't have peace. But that offer is still there. If the United States would just say, oh, wouldn't this be something? You either go with that, work that out, or we're cutting off all aid. the whole thing would change. Is it a hopeless situation? I wouldn't be talking if I thought it was totally hopeless. There is a slow dawning in the American public. As I say, groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, marvelous. They formed their commission, their Milwaukee branch. I was there for it to join with it. A rabbi introduced it, said he had 40 rabbis, he says, are part of it. Most of them don't dare tell their congregations because of the pressure they'd be put under, but their heart is with it. These are the genuine, beautiful Jews who recognize justice. Could Judaism eventually triumph over Zionism? That is my hope. Thank you.
And another point I want to make is that all Arab people are Semitic people.
Right.
The term anti-Semitic for criticism of Israel is just wrong.
Yeah, that's another aspect that the Semites are a much broader category. What you're really talking about, I went back and forth between the anti-Jewish, which is more precise, but as I say, that anti-Jewish sentiment is being fueled particularly very strong in Europe, precisely because of the treatment of the Palestinians, as that gets known. So actually, the Zionism is the main source of anti-Jewish thought in the modern world today, and as that information gets out, it's very controlled. You could Google an article I wrote where even Rachel Maddow dares not tread. And that is in any criticism of Israeli policy. She'll take on almost anybody. She will not take on. So that kind of enforced silence is not healthy, and it's not good for Israel. I'll tell you, if I were living in Israel, I would not feel secure. Now that we have little drones that can carry big poisonous bombs, you're alienating all the nations around you. The one thing that unites the Arab world is resentment. Mohammed Shali, who planned the 9/11, said one of their motives for 9/11 was our suppression of the Palestinian people, being the paymaster for Israel, as Tony Jute, a Jewish writer, said. You are the paymaster. That was part of the reason for 9/11. We say, okay, well, we forgive everything. We forgive the USS Liberty, the Rachel Carr. There's a weirdness in this. And I like, let's have honesty in it. And as I say, I wrote another article called Why I Am a Jew. That'll crop up in Google. Marquette thought, he's pro-choice and now he's a Jew? So no end to this man? But I said, I was a Jew. Yeah, I am a Jew. Anybody coming out of the Christianity is a child of Islam. And Jesus was not a Christian. He was a Jew. His Bible was the Hebrew Bible. So yeah, of course, that's the heart of the whole tradition. That story I was describing to you early on, that epic poetry of the human race teeters between Egypt and Sinai. That's a story of universal application. And that was like a leitmotif in a symphony. You keep hearing it coming again, all through the Bible, right into the Christian Bible. The same thing is there. That's the great mystery. That's what you should unite all of us. So as I say, I keep stressing Jewish Voice for Peace. They're much better than J Street. J Street is half-hearted in my view. But Jewish Voice for Peace, no. Let's put the pressure on. And they are pious Jews, too. They frequently have spiritual sessions where, how do we deal with this? And how do we still keep our Jewish identity? One of them said to me when I told the topic of my talk here, can I get a copy of it? They wanted to hear that, the beauty of Judaism and the perils of Zionism, which is really making it risky. Little nukes, little suitcase-sized nukes have been available for 40 years. And that's all it takes. Tel Aviv could go like that, just like that. And now the drone technology is, the genie's out of the bottle. Stuff can be delivered. The so-called Iron Dome, which gets highly touted, is full of holes. It doesn't even stop the primitive little things that the Gazans were tossing hopelessly into Israel. Very vulnerable situation. It's a case where the only security for Israel is peace, and not a fake peace. When the Zionists use the word peace, they mean everybody accept the status quo. And anybody who resists it, will smash you to smithereens. We'll mow that lawn, which is you in that process. That's not the way to peace. I think there's Mark Ellis, the Jewish, used to be head of the Jewish Center at Baylor, and he said, he loves Israel. He loves Judaism. He said, I could see it go up in smoke. Hitler could get his ultimate dream. The technology is there to simply end it. There's no hope other than peace. And peace is the only way to get peace, is to recognize, move back to the 67 borders. They've settled on that. They had no right to those borders, but they're going to be accepted. That's reality. And then have two independent, it could be a thriving part of the world. And it could be a part of the world where any scholar would want to go there and study Judaism and all of these things that I've been talking about. But it would be one nation. The only solution, Jewish Voice for Peace said, we don't care whether it's 2 states or 12 states, as long as each state is totally democratic and everybody has the right to vote and so forth and so on. Peace is so close as a concept.
Several years ago, someone in Hamas said, we want to drive the Israelis into the sea. Now, the Israelis say that's a gift that keeps on giving because you keep hearing it and hearing it and hearing it. Hamas hasn't said that for a long time. My question is, I've heard Netanyahu and other Israelis, including members of our Senate and Congress, which are kind of like Israelis sometimes, say that they link Hamas with ISIL. I hear that a lot lately. How are they getting away with linking Hamas with ISIL?
Netanyahu, as soon as the ugly face of ISIS appeared, he immediately said, that's Hamas, and transferred it. And it's absurd. They're totally different things. Who is really implicated in ISIS? The United States of America, mainly. If you go, Colin Powell, I don't know why he did such awful things. He has more brains than that. But he's the one that said, you break it, you own it. You're going to be stuck with it forever. We went over there and broke the system. Now, those systems were tyrannical. They were awful. But they had a stability. You got water and you got electricity 24/7. And we went in and wrecked that whole thing. And what did that do? It unleashed the crazies. I'd say the people who should be worried about prejudice now are Muslims. Muslims are, the press, everything you hear in the press, it looks like a cesspool of evil and insanity and everything else. This is not Islam. This is, this is a caricature of Islam, but the worst elements are there. And it's a terrible time for Muslims at the present time in this country and in elsewhere, because the crazies are being identified with them. If you say, remember the bombing of the Oklahoma City that killed 250 people, including children and so forth, that was done by an Irish Catholic. So, the Irish Catholics are bombing. No, ISIS is a very sick, horrid form of deviation. It's a horrible thing. And Hamas, again, I repeat, Hamas is not even a nation. It's a political party. It's had some unfortunate, stupid rhetoric in the past. It has no power. It is not a threat to Israel, and it can't be. And so I think that gets very tired, that characterized huge threat that Hamas is going to drive them into the sea. They're no more going to do that than the Little Sisters of the Poor are. Okay?
Yes. Can you expand your comments about the, I think it was the Deuteronomy 13 passage about the annihilation against the Hittites, the Mennonites, all the tribal, etc.?
Yeah, well, that was the way life was lived. That was the way war was done in those days. When the Romans said of Carthage, Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed, they meant nothing left, absolutely nothing left. That was the way in the ancient world, because it was an idea there was bad blood there and it was going to grow up, so you had to kill it 100%. The ancient Greeks and the Romans started to bring a little ethics into that, but it wasn't there when they're describing what was called herem in Deuteronomy 13. It wasn't there. That was the way life was done. The just war theory, as it began to develop, said, no, wait a minute, we just don't have total obliteration, because the Greeks started a lot of it, because even though parts of Greece were fighting, Sparta was fighting Athens, they also knew, hey guys, we're all Greeks, and we're going to have, after this mess, we're going to have to work stuff together. So they started to ameliorate and limit, put some limits on kill power. But the early kill power was unlimited. And yet, from that very world comes Isaiah. Take those swords, beat them into plowshares. The first envisioning of a world without war, what an irony, came out of Israel. That you could actually do it. Take those swords, beat them into plowshares, turn the earth green with hope, vegetation, food, instead of red with blood. It's just stunning that that appeared, that burst out of that particular period, given what else was going on at that time. But through most of history, as Ralph Linton, the anthropologist, said, we're tribal types. And we consider people of other tribes to be, among other things, a legitimate source of meat. You could eat them. And so obviously they were subhuman. Some of the early tribes, the word that described the tribe also described humanity. So if you were not of that tribe, you weren't human. And so obviously then you could obliterate the whole crowd. So, but those texts are, as I say, the best lesson I gave you in Bible talk is a lot of the Bible's descriptive, disgusting stuff in both the Christian and the Hebrew. It's the prescriptive light that started to break through. The descriptive text that I quoted, wives obey your husbands, switch over to Galatians 3:28. In the vision of the Jesus movement, there is no difference between male and female, between a slave and a free person, between a Greek and a Jew. Wild stuff. That's light bursting onto the scene. And those are the reasons we are interested in the Bible. That's why I'm still a Bible whacker.
I am pretty much strongly convinced that two states isn't going to work anymore.
Yeah.
We know from the facts on the ground. We know the Likud charter says that it is firmly opposed to a Palestinian state, and certainly many writers and thinkers, Mazen Kumsia, whom you quite likely know from Bethlehem University, and Jeff Helmer and others, have said it seems unlikely that Israel would agree to a two-state division that would be just because of the facts on the ground and the Green Line and all that. I would like to hear your comments on the wisdom and possibility of working towards one secular democratic state with equal rights for all, and it will cease to be a Jewish state as the demographics take their toll.
I believe there is no other solution, no other real solution. The other way you can do it is to suppress, turn it into an apartheid state, and just suppress, which is the current pattern. You disenfranchise a certain number, because otherwise the Jews are going to be outnumbered, they're going to be a minority, it's not going to be a Jewish state. I don't think there has to be a Jewish state any more than there has to be a Catholic state or a Lutheran state or even a Unitarian state. You need, if you want a state, it's a democratic state where all of the above mentioned people are free to interact. It could be, and to honor the tradition of Judaism, could have a strong accent on that. Could be really the place to go if you want to look into that tradition and into the Muslim tradition. So I think, I think the two-state thing has been rendered impossible by Israeli theft. They've stolen too much land. They've built it. When you look, especially look at that 5 broken cameras, you see the buildings going up. These are not little kibbutzim anymore. These are cities that are not going to go away. And so they've got to be part of a state where everybody has equal rights. And this 84-year-old speaker is tired. School's out.